I am a cage in search of a bird. Welcome, dear listener, to Whispered Tales. Tonight, we will dive into the quiet depths of Franz Kafka's mind, where this haunting phrase echoes through the corridors of his thoughts. So, find a comfortable place, lay down, close your eyes, and let the world outside drift away as we explore the inner landscapes of one of literature's most enigmatic voices. I am a cage in search of a bird. These words, so simple yet so profound, capture the essence of Kafka's worldview, one filled with a deep sense of longing, of being trapped, and yet always searching. In these few words, Kafka reveals a life spent grappling with the limits of existence, the confines of the self, and the endless pursuit of something just beyond reach. For Kafka, life was often a paradox, a constant tension between freedom and entrapment, between desire and fear. As we journey through his world tonight, let this thought linger in your mind. What are we all searching for? And what, if anything, do we feel is holding us back? Take a deep breath. Feel your body sink deeper into the softness of where you are lying. The day has come to an end, and now it's time to let go, to let your mind wander through the quiet, whispering spaces of Kafka's world, where the boundaries of reality and dreams blur, and where the cage and the bird are both metaphors for the human soul's deepest desires. In Kafka's stories, the cage is not always physical, it is emotional, mental, sometimes even spiritual. It's the invisible walls we build around ourselves, the limitations we accept without questioning. But in those same stories, there is always a bird, somewhere, fluttering just beyond reach. It's the symbol of what we yearn for: freedom, connection, understanding, or maybe peace. Kafka himself was always searching, always in pursuit of something he couldn't quite grasp, a truth about the world, about himself, about the nature of existence. Tonight, as we drift through the quiet, I want you to think of your own cage. We all have one. It might be the expectations of others, the responsibilities of daily life, or the doubts that creep in when the world goes silent. But like Kafka, we are also in search of something more. What is the bird you're chasing? Maybe it's an idea, a dream, or a sense of purpose that feels just out of reach. And maybe, just maybe, the act of searching is where we find our meaning. Kafka understood better than most the complexity of human existence. He knew that we are often our own worst captors, locking ourselves into cages made of fear, uncertainty, and self-doubt. Yet, at the same time, we are also creatures of hope, constantly striving for more, always reaching for the next branch, the next possibility, even when it seems impossible. There is something deeply human in that eternal search, and Kafka captured it in a way that resonates across time and space. As you lie here, relaxed, let these thoughts wash over you. Feel the tension leave your body as you sink deeper into comfort. The day is done, and now, in the soft light of the evening, it is time to let go of everything. Let the quiet hum of Kafka's words guide you, and feel yourself drift into that dreamlike state where anything is possible. The cage and the bird. Two parts of the same whole. One represents the limitations we feel, the boundaries that life places on us. The other is the endless potential, the freedom that lies just beyond. Kafka's genius was in understanding that these two forces are always intertwined, that in every limitation there is a space for imagination to soar. And in every moment of freedom there is the subtle reminder of the cage that still lingers in the background. Take another deep breath. Feel the cool air fill your lungs and then release it, letting go of any lingering thoughts from the day. Now is the time for reflection, for calm, for entering the world of dreams, where Kafka's stories come alive in new and unexpected ways. The bird is always just beyond, but the search is part of the journey. As you drift off, think of Kafka's characters, wandering through mazes of their own making, trapped in systems they don't understand, yet still always searching. The stories may seem bleak, but within them there is also a quiet beauty, a reminder that, even in the darkest moments, we are never truly alone. We are all in search of something. We are all, in our own way, cages longing for birds. So tonight, let go of the cage for a while. Let yourself float, free and untethered, in the space of your own imagination. The night is quiet, and the world outside has faded away. Now, all that's left is the soft rustling of wings, the quiet flutter of possibility. The bird may be just beyond reach, but for now, simply rest in the beauty of the search. Remember to follow our channel for more whispered tales that will guide you through the intricate, delicate landscapes of the minds of literary and historical giants. Let these quiet whispers soothe your mind and soul, helping you find peace, rest, and perhaps a little closer understanding of your own search. Good night, dear listener. May you find your bird in your dreams. Once upon a time, in the shadowed streets of old Prague, there lived a man who saw the world through a veil of dreams and nightmares. His name was Franz Kafka, a quiet soul, almost invisible to those around him, yet his inner world was filled with the strangest of stories, tales that flickered like dim candlelight in the dark corners of the mind. Born into a time of transformation, in a city where the cobblestone streets echoed with the footsteps of many lives passing by, Kafka stood apart, watching, always observing, but never quite belonging. His world was one of contradictions. On one side, there was the bustling life of the city, filled with the hum of conversations in German, Czech, and Yiddish, the sound of horses' hooves against stone, and the constant motion of people hurrying from one place to another. On the other side, there was an overwhelming silence within Kafka's heart, a silence filled with questions, with doubt, and with the ever-present sense that something just out of reach was waiting to swallow him whole. And so, as day turned to night and the world fell into its familiar rhythms, Kafka began to write. But Kafka's stories were not like those of others. They were strange, twisted, filled with moments of surreal horror and absurdity. They whispered of invisible forces, of walls that closed in around you without warning, of faceless judges and endless trials, of men who woke up one morning to find they were no longer men at all but something far more grotesque. Yet, within these stories, there was a delicate beauty, a sense of wonder, as if Kafka was trying to show us something that we all feel but rarely speak of, that life itself is a puzzle, filled with uncertainties and invisible boundaries that we are never meant to fully understand. As a boy, Kafka had always felt like an outsider. His father, a large, imposing man, cast a long shadow over him. Kafka was sensitive, quiet, and introverted, while his father was loud and commanding, a figure of authority that Kafka could never truly escape. Their relationship, strained and distant, would haunt Kafka for the rest of his life, feeding into his stories like a dark, looming presence that could never be shaken. It was as if the roles had been reversed, with Kafka playing the part of the small, helpless creature and his father the towering force, much like the characters in his future works. And so, in the quiet hours of the night, Kafka's mind wandered into strange and fantastical realms, where human beings were not the masters of their own fate but mere pawns in the hands of some unseen, all-powerful force. The bureaucratic machines of his stories, the courtrooms, the castles, the endless corridors, were metaphors for the complexities of life, the inescapable feeling that we are all trapped in some grand game without knowing the rules. But Kafka's world was not all darkness. There was light, too, though it flickered faintly at the edges. His prose, so simple yet so profound, danced with moments of unexpected tenderness. His characters, though lost and bewildered, were human to their core. They longed for connection, for understanding, for some form of escape from the invisible cages that surrounded them. And perhaps it was this quiet longing that made Kafka's stories feel like dreams, beautiful, haunting, and always just out of reach. As the years passed, Kafka's stories, written in secret and shared with only a few close friends, began to take on a life of their own. He never sought fame, never imagined that his tales would one day echo across the world, yet there was something timeless in his words, something that resonated with the deepest fears and desires of the human heart. Kafka's world, though strange and disorienting, was also familiar, a reflection of the quiet anxieties that linger in the corners of our minds. And so, as we journey through the life and works of Franz Kafka, we step into a world where the lines between reality and dream blur, where the ordinary becomes extraordinary, and where the silent whispers of the soul speak louder than the clamor of the outside world. In the heart of Prague, where the old streets seem to twist and turn like the pages of an ancient book, Franz Kafka's world was one of shadows and whispers, shaped by the complex web of history, culture, and family ties that surrounded him. The city itself, with its towering Gothic spires and winding alleyways, was a place of mystery, where the old and the new collided in strange and unexpected ways. It was here, in this enigmatic city, that Kafka began to see the world not as it was, but as it felt, an intricate maze of invisible forces, unseen judgments, and quiet suffering. The Prague of Kafka's youth was a city divided, much like Kafka himself. He was born into a Jewish family, living in a predominantly Christian city in a region that was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The streets echoed with the voices of many cultures, Czech, German, and Yiddish mixing together, creating a city of both unity and tension. Kafka's identity was shaped by this complexity. He spoke German, the language of the empire, but he was also part of the Jewish minority, a people who had long felt the weight of exclusion and alienation. It was a world of contrasts, where tradition clashed with modernity, and where Kafka always felt like a stranger, even in his own home. His family life only deepened this sense of isolation. Kafka's father, Hermann, was a man of great physical presence and ambition, a successful businessman with little patience for his son's quiet, introspective nature. The towering figure of his father loomed large over Kafka's childhood, casting a long shadow that would haunt him throughout his life. Kafka's relationship with his father was strained, filled with unspoken tension and a sense of deep inadequacy. Hermann Kafka was a man who valued strength, control, and success, while Franz was drawn to the delicate, the subtle, and the intellectual. This fundamental clash would become one of the central themes in Kafka's writing, the feeling of being small and powerless in the face of an overwhelming authority, unable to break free from the invisible chains that bind. Beyond the walls of his family home, the broader world was also changing. Europe was on the brink of a new era, one marked by rapid industrialization, political upheaval, and the creeping influence of bureaucracy. Kafka, who worked in insurance by day, saw firsthand the growing complexity of the bureaucratic systems that were beginning to govern every aspect of life. He understood the faceless power of these systems, the way they could reduce human beings to numbers, papers, and processes, stripping away individuality and freedom. It was a world where people were swallowed up by the machinery of modern life, and Kafka, ever the observer, would later turn these themes into the foundation of his stories. But Kafka's world was not only shaped by the forces of bureaucracy and authority. The cultural landscape of early 20th century Europe was also a place of intellectual awakening. Kafka was part of a vibrant literary and artistic community in Prague, where ideas flowed as freely as the rivers that ran through the city. He was deeply influenced by the works of Dostoevsky, Nietzsche, and Freud, whose explorations of the human psyche and the nature of existence resonated with his own inner struggles. Yet, despite the intellectual richness of his surroundings, Kafka remained distant, always feeling as though he were watching life from the outside, never truly a part of it. As the world around him shifted and changed, Kafka's inner world grew more complex. The tension between his Jewish heritage, his German language, and the Czech culture of his homeland mirrored the internal conflict that defined his life. He was a man caught between worlds, between tradition and modernity, between family and individuality, between duty and desire. These contradictions, these invisible walls that seemed to hem him in at every turn, would become the very fabric of his stories. Kafka's world was not just one of external forces, but also one of deep internal conflict. His struggles with self-doubt, anxiety, and illness colored every aspect of his life, feeding into the dreamlike, often nightmarish, quality of his writing. The sense of being trapped in a world that was both familiar and strange, where the rules were never clear and the outcome always uncertain, was not just a literary device, it was Kafka's reality. And as he moved through the streets of Prague, surrounded by the history and culture of his time, he carried within him the seeds of the stories that would one day change the world of literature forever. Through the lens of his unique perspective, Kafka's Prague became more than just a city. It became a symbol of the human condition, a place where alienation, confusion, and longing were not just experiences, but the very air one breathed. And it was within this world of shadows, where the boundaries between reality and dream were blurred, that Kafka began to craft the stories that would make him one of the most profound and mysterious voices of the modern age. Franz Kafka's youth was a time marked by contrasts and deep inner conflict. Born into a well-to-do Jewish family in Prague, young Kafka found himself at odds with both the world around him and the people closest to him, particularly his father. As a child, Kafka was introspective, sensitive, and unusually perceptive, a boy who watched the world through wide, questioning eyes. He was not the boisterous, strong-willed son his father had hoped for, and this difference between them would haunt Kafka throughout his life. Kafka's father, Hermann, was a towering figure, both physically and emotionally. He was a self-made man, a businessman who valued strength, practicality, and control. Kafka, however, was drawn to the world of ideas, emotions, and creativity. The two were like opposite poles of a magnet, always connected, yet never able to come together without tension. Hermann Kafka's dominance in the household was absolute, and Franz, the quiet observer, often felt crushed under the weight of his father's expectations. This strained relationship would later be immortalized in Kafka's famous letter to his father, a work that reveals the depth of the emotional wound left by this lifelong conflict. In the streets of Prague, young Kafka wandered through a world that was rapidly modernizing. The city itself was a mix of old and new, where Gothic cathedrals stood side by side with the early signs of industrialization. But despite the noise and energy of the world outside, Kafka felt increasingly isolated. As a child, he struggled to fit in, both within his family and among his peers. School was a mixed experience for Kafka. Although he excelled academically, he found little joy in the rigid structures of formal education. The rules, the hierarchy, the expectations, all of it felt suffocating to a boy whose mind was filled with questions that went far beyond the classroom walls. At the same time, Kafka began to discover the world of literature. Books became his escape, a doorway into realms of imagination where he could explore the deepest corners of the human soul. Writers like Dostoevsky, Flaubert, and Goethe opened Kafka's mind to new possibilities, and he quickly fell in love with the written word. Literature was not just a hobby for Kafka, it became his lifeline, a way to make sense of the confusing, often oppressive world around him. While other boys his age might have found comfort in sports or socializing, Kafka found solace in the quiet solitude of reading and writing. Despite his introversion, Kafka was not entirely a loner. He formed a small circle of close friends, many of whom shared his intellectual interests. Max Brod, one of Kafka's lifelong companions, would play a pivotal role in shaping Kafka's literary career, encouraging him to pursue his passion for writing even when Kafka himself doubted his talent. Brod would later become the steward of Kafka's legacy, ensuring that his friends' works were published posthumously, despite Kafka's own wishes for them to be destroyed. Yet, even in his friendships, Kafka often felt disconnected, as if there were an invisible barrier separating him from the rest of the world. His self-doubt was ever present, and his anxiety, which would grow more intense as he aged, made it difficult for him to truly feel at ease in the company of others. As he moved into adulthood, this feeling of alienation would become one of the central themes of his writing. The young Kafka, always the observer, never quite able to fully participate in life, began to see the world as a kind of dream, one where people move through their days without fully understanding the forces that shape their destinies. At university, Kafka's sense of being torn between two worlds only deepened. He pursued a degree in law, a field that promised stability and respectability, but his heart remained in literature. The tension between his sense of duty to his family, to society, and his own desires became a recurring struggle. Kafka often found himself caught between what was expected of him and what he truly wanted, a dilemma that would later find expression in his stories, where characters are often trapped in situations beyond their control, seeking a way out but never quite finding it. It was during these formative years that Kafka's inner world began to take shape, the world that would one day emerge in his writing. A world where authority figures, like his father, loomed large, casting long shadows over the lives of those around them. A world where bureaucratic systems seemed to exist only to confuse and entrap, mirroring the sense of powerlessness Kafka often felt in his own life. And a world where the lines between reality and fantasy blurred, creating an unsettling dreamscape that would become the hallmark of Kafka's literary style. As he grew older, Kafka's youthful observations and experiences would crystallize into the strange, haunting tales that now define his legacy. The young boy who wandered through the streets of Prague, feeling like an outsider in his own home, would become the man who wrote about the absurdity of existence, the quiet suffering of those who never quite fit into the mold that society has prepared for them. And while Kafka may have felt isolated and powerless in his youth, it was through this very isolation that he found the voice that would make him one of the most profound and influential writers of the 20th century. In the twilight of Franz Kafka's early adulthood, as the shadows lengthened over the cobblestone streets of Prague, the world he had known as a child began to slip further and further away. Gone were the days of quiet observation, the boyish wonder of gazing at the spires of the old city, wondering what life had in store for him. In its place, Kafka found himself walking a tightrope between two worlds, teetering precariously between duty and desire, between the practical demands of life and the soaring dreams of a writer's heart. But life, as Kafka would soon discover, had other plans for him, plans that felt more like the plot of one of his own unsettling stories. By the time Kafka reached university, the weight of expectations hung heavily upon his slender frame. He had enrolled in law school, not out of passion but out of necessity, a path chosen more for his father's approval than for his own. Law was a respectable field, a way to earn a stable living, to secure a place in the world. But the intricacies of legal study, with its rules, structures, and endless bureaucratic procedures, felt stifling to Kafka. It was a world of logic and order, while Kafka's mind was alive with the illogical, the chaotic, the dreamlike world of stories and imagination. Yet Kafka moved through his days with the quiet resignation of someone who had accepted that life would always be this way, fragmented, divided, and full of contradictions. By day, he attended lectures, filled notebooks with detailed notes on contracts and statutes, all the while feeling as though he were sinking deeper into a quicksand of obligations. By night, however, his spirit stirred, slipping free of the chains of the mundane. In the dim light of his room, with only the flickering glow of a candle to keep him company, Kafka let his mind wander into the dark corners of his imagination. It was in these solitary moments that Kafka's true self emerged. Here, in the quiet stillness of the night, the young law student transformed into the writer he longed to be. His pen moved across the page, weaving strange tales of men trapped in labyrinthine systems, of powerless individuals caught in the web of faceless authorities, of dreamlike worlds where nothing made sense, yet everything felt hauntingly familiar. These were not just stories, they were reflections of Kafka's own inner turmoil, his sense of being lost in a world that demanded conformity when all he wanted was to escape. But Kafka's writing was not a joyful escape, it was a painful, often grueling process. He wrote with the intensity of someone trying to dig their way out of a prison, each word a brick pulled away from the walls that surrounded him. The stories that poured out of him were strange, unsettling, and filled with a quiet desperation. They spoke of alienation, of the crushing weight of societal expectations, and of the incomprehensible nature of the world. These stories were Kafka's way of making sense of the senseless, of trying to find order in the chaos. Yet, despite the dark themes that ran through his work, Kafka's writing was also a form of salvation. It was in these pages that he found a voice that could express the fears and anxieties he could never put into words in his daily life. For Kafka, writing was not just an art, it was a lifeline, a way to reconcile the many parts of himself that seemed to exist in constant conflict. The young man who wore the mask of a dutiful law student by day could, in the privacy of his own thoughts, transform into the visionary writer who saw the world in all its absurd, fragmented glory. Even as Kafka progressed through his legal studies, he felt the pull of literature growing stronger. But the path of a writer was fraught with uncertainty, especially for someone like Kafka, who was plagued by self-doubt. Every word he wrote seemed to echo with the voices of his critics, his father's voice chief among them. What good is writing? He imagined his father saying. What kind of life is that? And so, Kafka kept his stories to himself, sharing them only with a few trusted friends like Max Brod, who saw in Kafka a genius that the world had yet to discover. Brod, a fellow writer and Kafka's closest confidant, urged him to take his writing more seriously, to step out of the shadows and share his work with the world. But Kafka resisted. He saw himself as a man caught between two lives, the practical life that his family and society expected him to lead, and the artistic life that beckoned to him like a distant dream. The pressure to choose weighed heavily on him, yet Kafka found himself paralyzed, unable to fully commit to either path. As he inched closer to completing his law degree, Kafka's health began to falter. The long hours of study, combined with the emotional toll of his inner struggles, took their toll on his body. He was plagued by bouts of insomnia, migraines, and a persistent cough that would later reveal itself as tuberculosis. The illness, though not yet severe, hung over him like a dark cloud, a reminder of his own fragility and mortality. Still, Kafka pressed on, determined to fulfill his obligations, even as his spirit cried out for release. The world outside grew darker with the looming specter of war, and Kafka, like many of his generation, felt the weight of history pressing down on him. The structures of society, law, government, authority, seemed to grow more oppressive with each passing day, and Kafka's writing became an outlet for his growing sense of unease. It was during this period of inner conflict and outward pressure that Kafka's most famous works began to take shape. In the quiet hours of the night, when the world was asleep, Kafka gave life to characters who wandered through strange, nightmarish worlds, characters who, like him, were trapped in a web of duties, expectations, and incomprehensible forces. His stories became more than just reflections of his personal struggles. They became metaphors for the human condition, capturing the existential dread that so many people felt as they faced the uncertainty of the modern world. As Kafka moved through his days, the tension between his two worlds, law and literature, duty and desire, grew ever tighter. He walked the line as best he could, but in his heart, he knew that the path he was on was unsustainable. The young boy who had once gazed at the world with wide, curious eyes was now a man burdened by the weight of too many expectations. And yet, even in the midst of this internal struggle, Kafka continued to write, driven by a force he could not fully explain, a force that would one day make him one of the most enigmatic and influential writers of the modern age. As the early years of Kafka's adulthood slowly faded into memory, a quiet yet profound transformation began to unfold within him. The dark, brooding tones of his inner world, which had long been painted with hues of anxiety, alienation, and despair, started to give way to something lighter, more hopeful. This was not a sudden change, nor was it a complete departure from the deep, introspective nature that defined Kafka, but rather a subtle shift, a rose-colored whisper that crept into his thoughts and, eventually, his writing. The world around Kafka remained much the same. The streets of Prague still echoed with the familiar sounds of city life, the hum of industry and the chatter of passers-by, the distant clanging of church bells mingling with the click of horse-drawn carriages. But for Kafka, something inside him had shifted, almost imperceptibly, like the slow turning of a great wheel. Perhaps it was a response to the brief moments of joy he had begun to experience, fleeting glimpses of connection, moments of human warmth that pierced through the veil of isolation that had long surrounded him. This subtle transformation found its way into his writing as Kafka entered what would later be known as his Rose period. Just as Picasso had experienced a transition from the sorrowful blues to the vibrant warmth of the rose, so too did Kafka's work begin to take on a lighter tone. It was not that the darkness had disappeared, it lingered still, like a shadow at the edge of the light. But there was now a new element, something tender, something soft, as if the harshness of the world had, for a moment, been wrapped in the warmth of human connection. Kafka's stories during this time began to explore themes of love, community, and the possibility of belonging, though always with his signature touch of surrealism and absurdity. Characters who had once been alone, trapped in the labyrinthine worlds of bureaucracy and isolation, now found themselves reaching out to others, seeking connection in a world that, though still confusing and strange, offered moments of unexpected beauty. The harsh, angular lines of Kafka's earlier work softened into curves, the fragmented pieces of the puzzle beginning to come together, if only briefly, to form something whole. This period of Kafka's life was also marked by his increasing closeness to a few select individuals, most notably the women who would come to play important roles in his personal and emotional life. Though Kafka's relationships were often fraught with difficulty, plagued by his insecurities, fears of commitment, and health struggles, there were moments of tenderness that seemed to open a door within him. He longed for connection, even as he feared it, and this longing became a central theme in his Rose period works. One of the most significant figures during this time was Felice Bauer, a woman Kafka met through his close friend Max Brod. Their relationship, conducted mostly through letters, was intense and filled with the hopes and fears of a man torn between his desire for intimacy and his fear of being engulfed by it. Felice became both a muse and a mirror, reflecting back to Kafka his own uncertainties and insecurities, while also offering him a glimpse of a life that might be possible, a life where he was not completely alone. Kafka's letters to Felice reveal a man who was deeply conflicted, yet yearning for a connection that went beyond the superficial. He wrote to her with a raw vulnerability, expressing his fears, his hopes, and his doubts with a candor that he rarely showed to others. Their correspondence was both an intellectual exchange and an emotional lifeline, a place where Kafka could explore his deepest feelings in a way that felt safe, even as he grappled with the realities of their relationship. But like many things in Kafka's life, his relationship with Felice was marked by contradiction. He longed to be close to her, yet he feared the demands that intimacy might bring. The idea of marriage, of a shared life, terrified him, for it represented a kind of entrapment, a loss of the solitude that had become so central to his identity as a writer. And so, despite his affection for Felice, their relationship was a dance of closeness and distance, a constant ebb and flow that mirrored the themes of his writing during this time. In his fiction, this internal conflict manifested itself in characters who, like Kafka, longed for connection but found themselves thwarted by forces beyond their control. The worlds Kafka created were still strange, dreamlike, and filled with the surreal, but there was a softness now, a gentle glow that hinted at the possibility of something more. His stories no longer ended in total despair, but left room for a flicker of hope, however small. In one of his most tender works from this period, Kafka wrote of a trapeze artist who spent his entire life suspended above the ground, living in the air, never quite touching the earth. The artist, like Kafka himself, was caught between two worlds, one of safety and solitude, the other of connection and risk. Yet, despite the precariousness of his position, the trapeze artist found a kind of peace in his isolation, a balance that Kafka himself often sought but rarely found. But even as Kafka explored these softer themes, the underlying current of anxiety and existential doubt remained. The world, in all its absurdity and unpredictability, still loomed large, and Kafka's characters continued to struggle with the overwhelming sense of being lost in a universe that refused to make sense. The warmth of the Rose period was, in many ways, a fleeting respite from the darker realities that Kafka would soon return to in his later works. And yet, for a brief time, Kafka allowed himself to imagine a different world, a world where human beings, despite their many flaws and limitations, could find solace in one another. It was a world where love, though complicated and fragile, was possible, and where even the most alienated of souls could find moments of grace. As Kafka moved through this period of creative transformation, his writing became a reflection of the complex, ever-shifting landscape of his own heart. The boy who had once felt trapped in the shadow of his father's expectations was now a man who, though still burdened by doubt, had begun to see glimpses of light in the darkness. This, perhaps, was the gift of his rose period, a reminder that even in the most surreal and bewildering of worlds, there is always the possibility of beauty, always the chance that, for a moment, everything might just make sense. In the flickering candlelight of his study, Franz Kafka often found himself drawn to the strange, ethereal world of the circus. But for Kafka, the circus was not a place of joy and celebration, it was a place of paradox, where performers walked the tightrope between triumph and despair, where smiles were painted on the faces of clowns, masking a deeper, unspoken sorrow. It was a world of contrasts, of light and shadow, where human fragility was put on display beneath the bright lights of the ring. And as Kafka entered the next phase of his creative journey, this haunting vision of the circus became a powerful symbol in his work, a reflection of his own feelings of isolation, performance, and the relentless search for meaning. The rose period of Kafka's writing may have brought a touch of warmth and softness to his stories, but it was also tinged with the bittersweet realities of life, realities that, like circus performers, balance precariously between hope and hopelessness. The circus, with its vibrant costumes and daring feats, fascinated Kafka not because of its excitement, but because of the underlying melancholy that seemed to linger just beneath the surface. The acrobats, the clowns, the harlequins, they all lived in a world where every leap was a risk, every smile a mask, and every performance a fleeting moment in a life that was, ultimately, fragile. Kafka was particularly drawn to the figure of the trapeze artist. Suspended high above the ground, soaring through the air with effortless grace, the trapeze artist seemed to embody the very essence of Kafka's inner world. He was a man who lived his life in limbo, caught between the earth and the sky, forever teetering on the edge of safety and disaster. For Kafka, the trapeze artist was a symbol of the human condition, a person who, like himself, existed between two worlds, always striving for perfection yet always aware of the inevitable fault that awaited. In one of Kafka's lesser-known stories, First Sorrow, he wrote of a trapeze artist who, over time, became so dependent on his life in the air that he refused to come down. He lived day and night on the trapeze, performing his routine endlessly, terrified of the world below. Kafka described the artist's isolation, his obsession with his craft, and the growing sorrow that consumed him as he realized that his life, though filled with breathtaking moments of flight, had become a cage of his own making. The trapeze artist, much like Kafka himself, was caught in a cycle of performance, always striving, always seeking, yet never able to truly rest. The circus, in Kafka's eyes, was a microcosm of the world, a place where people played their roles, performed their tricks, and then retreated back into the shadows, their true selves hidden from view. It was a world where identity was fluid, where masks were worn not just for the audience, but for survival. The clowns, with their exaggerated expressions of joy, became symbols of the false faces people wore in society, always smiling, always performing, yet beneath the makeup, there was often a deep well of sadness, a loneliness that Kafka understood all too well. In Kafka's Rose period, the figure of the clown emerged as a recurring motif, a character who could embody both the lightness of humor and the weight of existential dread. The clown's slapstick routine, full of laughter and pratfalls, was a performance for the crowd, but behind the scenes, Kafka imagined the clown alone, exhausted, wiping off the paint and staring into the mirror, wondering who he truly was. This duality, the public mask versus the private self, was something Kafka grappled with throughout his life, and the circus gave him a framework to explore these themes in a way that was both surreal and deeply human. Yet, despite the darkness that lingered beneath the surface of Kafka's circus tales, there was also a sense of wonder. The acrobats, the jugglers, the contortionists, they defied gravity, logic, and expectation. They were artists, creating moments of beauty in a world that often seemed indifferent to their efforts. In many ways, Kafka saw himself as a kind of circus performer, balancing on the edge of despair, trying to create something meaningful in a world that often felt chaotic and cruel. In his personal life, Kafka was often torn between his desire for connection and his fear of it. Much like the performers in his stories, he longed to be seen, to be understood, yet he also feared the vulnerability that came with being truly known. His relationships, particularly with women like Felice Bauer and Milena Jasinska, mirrored the delicate dance of the trapeze artist, always moving closer, then pulling away, never quite able to find solid ground. The circus, with its fleeting moments of brilliance, reflected Kafka's own experience of life, a series of performances, moments of connection followed by the inevitable retreat into solitude. As Kafka moved through this period of creative exploration, his writing became a delicate balance between light and dark, humor and sorrow. The circus, with its dazzling performances and hidden sadness, gave him a way to explore the contradictions of the human experience, the joy and the pain, the beauty and the absurdity. It was a world where anything was possible, yet where nothing was ever truly as it seemed. And so, in the quiet hours of the night, Kafka's pen moved across the page, crafting stories that captured the delicate, fragile nature of life. His characters, like circus performers, danced through strange, surreal worlds, always on the edge of something greater, always striving for connection, yet always aware that, in the end, the lights would dim, the audience would go home, and they would be left alone, staring into the darkness. In Kafka's Rose period, the circus was not just a place of spectacle, it was a metaphor for the human condition. It was a world where people played their roles, where they performed their tricks, but where the underlying reality, the sorrow, the isolation, the longing, was always there, waiting in the wings. And it was in this world of clowns, acrobats, and harlequins that Kafka found a way to express the complexities of his own heart, a heart that, like the circus ring, was filled with both light and shadow, joy and sorrow, laughter and tears. Of all the strange and haunting stories Franz Kafka wrote, The Metamorphosis stands as perhaps his most famous and enigmatic. Published in 1915, this novella begins with one of the most memorable and surreal opening lines in literature. When Gregor Samsa woke up one morning from unsettling dreams, he found himself changed in his bed into a monstrous vermin. In this single sentence, Kafka sets the stage for a tale that blurs the lines between reality and nightmare, humanity and monstrosity, and isolation and connection. Gregor Samsa, the story's protagonist, is a young man who has been working tirelessly to support his family, sacrificing his own dreams and desires to pay off his father's debts. The weight of his responsibilities has been crushing him for years, and in his transformation, we see the physical manifestation of his inner life, a man who has been trapped, dehumanized, and slowly drained of his vitality. Overnight, Gregor becomes an insect, a creature of disgust, shunned by the very family he has sacrificed everything for. But Kafka's The Metamorphosis is not merely a tale of grotesque transformation, it is a profound exploration of alienation, the fragility of human identity, and the unsettling distance that can grow between individuals, even those who are closest to one another. As Gregor's transformation unfolds, so too does the transformation of his family. What starts as a moment of horror and disbelief soon turns into something much darker, as his family's initial shock turns into resentment and, eventually, outright neglect. In many ways, the Metamorphosis reflects Kafka's own feelings of alienation. Like Gregor, Kafka often felt disconnected from the people around him, trapped in a world where he could never fully belong. His relationship with his father, Hermann, looms large in the background of this story, much as it did in Kafka's own life. Just as Gregor's father views him as a burden, Kafka's own father was a figure of dominance and disappointment, a man who could never understand his son's quiet, sensitive nature. The symbolism of Gregor's transformation is as rich as it is disturbing. His metamorphosis into a bug, a creature reviled, ignored, and eventually discarded, mirrors the way Kafka himself felt in the face of societal expectations and familial pressure. Gregor's dehumanization is both literal and metaphorical, as he is reduced to an object of pity and disgust, no longer seen as a person by those around him. His once vibrant identity is stripped away, replaced by the monstrous shell of a creature that barely resembles the man he once was. Yet, despite the horror of his transformation, Gregor's initial reaction is not one of despair. He worries, instead, about being late for work, about how his family will manage without him. In this, we see Kafka's dark humor at play, an absurdity that speaks to the way modern life, with all its crushing responsibilities, can warp our sense of self. Even in the face of the unimaginable, Gregor's first thoughts are of his job, his obligations, and the societal pressures that have been imposed on him. As the story progresses, Gregor's physical condition worsens, and with it, his family's treatment of him becomes increasingly callous. His sister, Greta, who initially shows some sympathy, soon grows tired of caring for him, and his parents retreat further into their own lives, pretending that Gregor no longer exists. This breakdown of family bonds is one of the most tragic aspects of the metamorphosis, the slow realization that Gregor, in his new form, is no longer welcome in the home he has worked so hard to support. Kafka masterfully weaves together themes of isolation and guilt throughout the story. Gregor's physical isolation in his room, locked away from the rest of his family, mirrors his emotional and psychological isolation. As a human, Gregor had already felt cut off from the world, burdened by the expectations placed upon him. But now, as an insect, that sense of alienation becomes literal. He is trapped in a body that he does not recognize, unable to communicate with the people he loves, and forced to endure their growing resentment in silence. And yet, despite the bleakness of Gregor's situation, there is a strange beauty in Kafka's storytelling. The surreal nature of the story allows Kafka to explore profound truths about the human condition, about the ways in which we are shaped and deformed by the expectations of others, and about the fragility of our identities in a world that often refuses to see us for who we truly are. As Gregor's life slowly deteriorates, Kafka builds towards the inevitable conclusion, Gregor's death, not at the hands of his family, but through the slow erosion of his will to live. In his final moments, Gregor experiences a kind of peaceful resignation, as if, in his death, he is finally able to escape the prison of his body and the crushing weight of his responsibilities. His death is not heroic, nor is it tragic in the conventional sense. It is simply the end of a life that had long since been drained of meaning and purpose. In the wake of Gregor's death, his family undergoes their own transformation. With the burden of Gregor lifted, they begin to look forward to the future, speaking of new opportunities and the possibility of a better life. This final twist is perhaps the most unsettling part of Kafka's story. Gregor, who had sacrificed everything for his family, is quickly forgotten, his existence erased from their lives as if he had never been. His family's ability to move on so quickly reflects Kafka's own fears about the fleeting nature of human relationships and the ease with which we can be discarded when we are no longer useful. The Metamorphosis is not just a story of one man's transformation into a monstrous creature. It is a meditation on the ways in which society dehumanizes individuals, stripping away their humanity and reducing them to mere objects of utility. Through Gregor's tragic tale, Kafka explores the depths of alienation, the cruelty of familial obligation, and the quiet despair that comes from living in a world that refuses to see you for who you truly are. Even today, more than a century after its publication, The Metamorphosis continues to resonate with readers, its themes of isolation, identity, and the fragility of human connection as relevant as ever. Kafka's story, like the insect at its heart, crawls into the corners of our minds, whispering truths that are both uncomfortable and profound. It is a story that reminds us of the dangers of living a life defined by the expectations of others, and of the quiet tragedies that unfold when we lose sight of our own humanity. Franz Kafka's The Trial is a harrowing, surreal journey into a world where logic and justice no longer seem to apply, a world where one man, Joseph K., finds himself at the mercy of a faceless, incomprehensible system that has accused him of a crime he cannot name nor defend himself against. Published posthumously in 1925, The Trial stands as one of Kafka's most iconic and haunting works, a novel that delves into the labyrinthine nightmare of bureaucracy and the existential dread that accompanies the loss of control over one's fate. The story begins abruptly, without explanation, as Joseph K., a respectable banker, is arrested in his home one morning. His crime is never specified, and the authorities who come for him are vague and dispassionate. Despite this, K. is not immediately taken into custody but is instead left to live his life, albeit under the shadow of the looming trial. What follows is a bizarre and maddening journey through an illogical legal system, where K. must navigate a maze of hearings, courts, and judges, none of which seem to have any clear structure or purpose. In The Trial, Kafka creates a world that is both familiar and deeply unsettling. The setting is recognizable, an ordinary city, populated by ordinary people, but there is a growing sense of unreality that permeates every aspect of K's experience. The legal system, which should provide order and justice, is instead a chaotic, impenetrable force that seems to operate according to its own arbitrary rules. This is the essence of what we now call Kafkaesque, a sense of helplessness in the face of a bureaucratic machine that grinds on without reason or humanity, a system so vast and complex that it strips individuals of their agency and dignity. As K. tries to make sense of the accusations against him, he is drawn deeper into the system's convoluted web. He meets a series of strange and enigmatic characters, each of whom seems to represent a different facet of the corrupt, sprawling bureaucracy. From the passive, ineffective lawyer Holt to the seductive, mysterious Lenny, these figures offer little in the way of help or clarity. Instead, they seem to reinforce the absurdity of K's situation. No one truly understands the system, and no one can offer a solution. Kafka uses these characters to highlight the ways in which power operates in hidden and insidious ways. The judges, the lawyers, the clerks, none of them seem to have any real authority, yet they all play their part in perpetuating the system's oppressive, dehumanizing nature. In this world, There is no clear distinction between guilt and innocence, no definitive answers to be found. Instead, there is only endless waiting, endless confusion, and the ever-present sense that the machinery of the legal system will crush anyone who dares to question it. At the heart of the trial is K's growing sense of alienation and despair. As the trial progresses, he becomes increasingly isolated, both from the people around him and from his own sense of self. His colleagues at the bank begin to treat him with suspicion, and his personal relationships deteriorate. Even his attempts to fight back against the system, to assert his innocence, seem futile. No matter what he does, he cannot escape the invisible grip of the trial that hangs over him. One of the most powerful themes in the trial is the loss of identity. Joseph K., who begins the novel as a confident, successful man, is slowly stripped of his sense of self as he becomes entangled in the legal system. His name, once a symbol of his individuality, becomes merely a letter, K. A faceless, interchangeable entity in the eyes of the law. This reduction of the individual to a mere function of the system is one of Kafka's most chilling insights into the nature of power and control. In the trial, the individual is insignificant, a small cog in a much larger machine, and no matter how hard K tries to assert his autonomy, he is ultimately powerless against the forces arrayed against him. As K moves deeper into the legal labyrinth, Kafka masterfully builds a sense of claustrophobia and dread. The settings, dark, cramped courtrooms, endless corridors, decaying buildings, reflect K's growing entrapment, both physically and mentally. The novel structure, too, is disorienting, with episodes that seem to spiral into one another, giving the reader the sensation of being lost in a maze. Kafka's prose is simple yet deeply effective, creating a nightmarish atmosphere where every interaction, every conversation, seems to carry the weight of impending doom. Perhaps the most striking aspect of the trial is the way Kafka refuses to provide any clear answers or resolutions. K's guilt is never established, and the nature of the crime he is accused of remains a mystery throughout the novel. In Kafka's world, the truth is elusive, and the legal system is not concerned with justice or fairness, but with its own self-perpetuation. This lack of resolution only deepens the sense of helplessness that permeates the novel. For Kafka, the trial is not just a literal legal proceeding, it is a metaphor for the existential condition of modern life, where individuals are constantly judged, evaluated, and controlled by forces beyond their understanding or control. As K approaches the end of his trial, there is a growing sense of inevitability. Despite his efforts, despite his attempts to seek help and understand the charges against him, K seems to know, deep down, that he cannot escape his fate. The novel's conclusion is both shocking and strangely understated. Two men, who seem to represent the faceless bureaucracy, come to take K away. They lead him to a remote quarry, where, without ceremony, they stab him to death. K's final words, "like a dog," are a chilling reminder of the dehumanizing power of the system, reducing him to nothing more than an animal to be disposed of. The trial is a profoundly unsettling work, not only because of its nightmarish depiction of a world without justice, but also because it forces us to confront our own powerlessness in the face of the systems that govern our lives. Kafka's vision is bleak, yet it resonates deeply with readers who recognize in K's plight the struggles of their own lives, the feeling of being trapped in a world that makes no sense, where the rules are unclear, and where no matter how hard we try, we can never fully understand or control our fate. Even today, nearly a century after its publication, The Trial remains a powerful and relevant critique of the modern world. Kafka's exploration of bureaucracy, alienation, and the absurdity of power speaks to the anxieties of life in a complex, impersonal society. His portrayal of a man trapped in a system that cares nothing for his individuality or humanity continues to resonate, reminding us of the fragility of freedom and the ever-present danger of losing ourselves in the machinery of modern life. Through The Trial, Kafka offers no solutions, no path to redemption. Instead, he leaves us with a haunting vision of a world where justice is an illusion and where the individual is helpless against the forces that seek to control and define them. It is a novel that speaks to the darkest fears of the human condition, and yet, in its stark honesty, it offers a kind of strange, existential truth, one that, like Kafka's own life, is filled with contradictions, uncertainty, and the quiet, inescapable pull of the unknown. Franz Kafka's personal life was as enigmatic and complex as his literary works. His relationships, particularly with women, were a tangle of longing, fear, and the deep-seated insecurities that plagued him throughout his life. Though he never married, Kafka had several significant relationships that profoundly shaped both his inner world and his writing. These relationships were often intense but fraught with emotional turmoil, marked by Kafka's fear of intimacy, his struggles with self-worth, and the constant tension between his desire for connection and his need for solitude. One of the most pivotal figures in Kafka's life was Felice Bauer, a woman with whom Kafka shared a tumultuous 5-year relationship, most of it conducted through letters. They met in 1912 at a dinner party hosted by Kafka's close friend Max Brod. Felice, a bright and ambitious woman working in Berlin, seemed to represent everything Kafka both desired and feared. Their relationship, almost entirely lived on paper, offers a window into Kafka's psyche, revealing the deep ambivalence he felt toward intimacy. Kafka's letters to Felice, often long, obsessive, and filled with self-doubt, reveal a man torn between conflicting desires. On the one hand, he longed for companionship and love, seeing in Felice a potential partner who could offer him the stability and connection he craved. On the other hand, Kafka feared that marriage and domestic life would suffocate his creativity, trapping him in the very bourgeois existence he despised. His fear of being consumed by the demands of a relationship was ever present in their correspondence, and despite 2 engagements, Kafka ultimately broke off the relationship both times, unable to reconcile his longing for intimacy with his need for freedom. Kafka's letters to Felice are filled with vivid imagery and emotion, but they also reflect the deep insecurities that plagued him. He often described himself as unworthy of her love, expressing his belief that he was incapable of being a good husband or partner. Kafka's frail health, his intense focus on his writing, and his struggles with self-esteem all contributed to his fear of marriage. In one letter, he famously wrote, "What have I in common with Jews? I have hardly anything in common with myself, and should stand very quietly in a corner, content that I can breathe." The relationship with Felice, while never culminating in marriage, left a lasting impact on Kafka's life and work. The constant push and pull between attraction and fear, intimacy and isolation, found its way into his fiction. Many of Kafka's characters, particularly in works like The Trial and The Castle, reflect this sense of being trapped between 2 worlds, one of connection and the other of alienation. In these stories, the protagonists often find themselves striving for an unreachable goal, much like Kafka himself in his search for love and understanding. Another important relationship in Kafka's life was with Milena Jasenska, a journalist and writer who translated some of Kafka's works into Czech. Unlike his relationship with Felice, which was largely cerebral and distant, Kafka's connection with Milena was deeply emotional and passionate. The two met in 1920, when Kafka was already ill with tuberculosis, and their brief but intense correspondence offers a glimpse into Kafka's vulnerable and passionate side. Milena, a married woman at the time, became Kafka's confidant, and their letters reveal a mutual admiration and affection that ran deep. Milena understood Kafka in a way that few others did. She was fiercely intelligent, independent, and unafraid to confront Kafka's insecurities head-on. In their letters, Kafka expressed a raw honesty that he had rarely shown before, opening up about his fears, his illness, and his deep sense of inadequacy. But as with Felice, Kafka's fear of intimacy and his deteriorating health prevented their relationship from fully blossoming. Milena, though deeply fond of Kafka, remained married, and their relationship remained unconsummated, existing largely through letters filled with longing and sadness. Kafka's letters to Milena are some of the most poignant writings he left behind. In them, we see a man who is desperately seeking connection, but who is also profoundly aware of the limitations imposed by his own mind and body. Kafka's tuberculosis, which had begun to worsen by the time he met Milena, added an additional layer of tragedy to their relationship. His illness became a symbol of the fragility of life and love, a constant reminder that time was slipping away. In one of his letters to Milena, Kafka wrote, "I am constantly trying to communicate something incommunicable, to explain something inexplicable, to tell about something I have in my bones which can only be experienced in those bones." In the final years of Kafka's life, another woman would come to play a significant role, Dora Diamond. Kafka met Dora in 1923 while staying in a seaside town, and she quickly became his companion during the last year of his life. Unlike his relationships with Felice and Milena, which were defined by distance and emotional tension, Kafka's time with Dora was marked by a quiet sense of contentment. Dora, a much younger woman, shared Kafka's intellectual curiosity and spiritual sensibilities, and they lived together in Berlin, where she cared for him as his health continued to decline. Dora represented a final, brief chapter of happiness for Kafka. In her, he found a sense of peace that had eluded him for much of his life. Their relationship, though tragically short due to Kafka's illness, was one of the few in which Kafka seemed to feel a true connection without the overwhelming fear that had haunted his previous relationships. Dora remained with Kafka until his death in 1924, and her presence during his final months provided him with a comfort he had rarely known. Kafka's relationships with these women were not just personal, they were deeply intertwined with his creative process. His fear of intimacy, his longing for connection, and his sense of isolation all found expression in his writing. The themes of alienation, guilt, and the inescapable nature of fate that permeate his work were reflected in his personal life, where love and connection always seemed just out of reach. In his letters, we see Kafka not as the detached, cerebral writer of surreal tales, but as a man struggling with the same desires and fears that define the human experience. His relationships were a mirror of his inner world, filled with contradictions, marked by longing and loss, but also touched by moments of profound beauty. Through these relationships, we catch a glimpse of the man behind the stories, a man who, despite his fears, never stopped reaching for something greater than himself. Kafka's life may have been one of struggle and isolation, but it was also one of deep emotional complexity. His relationships, though often unfulfilled, gave him a way to explore the deepest parts of himself and provided the emotional fuel for his literary masterpieces. In the end, Kafka's search for love and connection, though marked by pain and fear, was a testament to his humanity, and it is through this lens that we can better understand the writer and the man. In addition to Franz Kafka's haunting stories and complex relationships, his letters and diaries offer a deeply personal and revealing glimpse into the mind of one of the 20th century's most enigmatic writers. Unlike his fiction, which often hides its author behind layers of surrealism and abstraction, Kafka's personal writings lay bare his thoughts, fears, and desires in a raw, unfiltered way. These writings are not only important for understanding Kafka as a person, but also provide critical insight into the creative process that shaped his work. Kafka's diaries, spanning from 1910 to 1923, are a testament to his inner turmoil. In these pages, we find a man who was perpetually at odds with himself, grappling with feelings of inadequacy, existential dread, and deep loneliness. His diaries serve as a mirror to his fragmented soul, where he constantly questions his worth, not just as a writer, but as a human being. They reveal his crippling self-doubt and his fear that he would never live up to his own expectations or the expectations of those around him. One of the recurring themes in Kafka's diaries is his struggle with the act of writing itself. For Kafka, writing was both a necessity and a torment. It was his way of making sense of the world, of expressing the inexpressible, but it was also an agonizing process that often left him feeling depleted and frustrated. In one particularly revealing diary entry, Kafka wrote, "Writing is utter solitude, the descent into the cold abyss of oneself." This sentiment encapsulates Kafka's relationship with his craft. Writing was his means of survival, yet it also alienated him from the world, drawing him deeper into his own isolation. Kafka's diaries also explore his complicated relationship with his family, particularly his domineering father, Hermann Kafka. Throughout his life, Kafka felt overshadowed and crushed by his father's immense presence. This conflict is most explicitly explored in his famous letter to his father, written in 1919 but never sent. In this letter, Kafka pours out his soul, describing in excruciating detail the ways in which his father's criticism, harshness, and lack of understanding had shaped him into the anxious, insecure man he had become. The letter is not just a catalog of grievances, it is also a profound exploration of Kafka's own psychology. He acknowledges his weaknesses, his timidity, and his inability to stand up to his father, yet he also expresses the deep desire for understanding and reconciliation. The letter is filled with both bitterness and longing, as Kafka struggles to articulate the immense influence his father had on his life and work. "Fear of my father," Kafka wrote, "I have lived with it all my life. I am still wrapped in it like a net." This letter, perhaps more than any other piece of writing, illuminates the profound effect that Kafka's father had on his psyche and his creative output. Kafka's letters, particularly those to the women in his life, reveal another side of the writer, a man who longed for connection but was perpetually afraid of it. His correspondence with Felice Bauer, Milena Jasenska, and Dora Diamond shows Kafka's deep emotional complexity. In these letters, we see a man who yearned for love and companionship, but who also feared the loss of his own identity in the process. Kafka's letters are filled with confessions of his insecurities, his fears of intimacy, and his constant vacillation between desire and withdrawal. To Felice Bauer, Kafka wrote some of the most revealing and obsessive letters of his life. Their relationship, conducted almost entirely through correspondence, became an outlet for Kafka's anxieties and hopes. His letters to her are filled with self-analysis, as he constantly questions his ability to be a good husband and partner. At times, he writes with passion and longing, At others, he expresses despair at the thought of being consumed by marriage and domesticity. In one letter, he wrote, "I am like a man who is bound to a horse that is riding into the ground." This image captures Kafka's fear of being overwhelmed by the demands of a conventional life, and it is a theme that runs throughout much of his personal correspondence. Kafka's letters to Milena Jasenska, a Czech journalist and translator, are perhaps the most emotionally intense. Unlike his relationship with Felice, which was largely intellectual and distant, his connection with Milena was marked by deep passion and vulnerability. In their letters, Kafka opens up about his fears, his illness, and his need for emotional and spiritual understanding. He reveals a side of himself that was hidden from the outside world, one that craved intimacy but was terrified of being hurt. To Milena, he wrote, "I cannot make you understand. I cannot make anyone understand what is happening inside me. I cannot even explain it to myself." In these letters, we see Kafka as a man who was deeply conflicted. On one hand, he wanted love and connection, but on the other hand, he feared that such relationships would imprison him, taking him away from his writing and his inner life. His letters to Milena, like those to Felice, are filled with contradictions, expressions of affection followed by expressions of doubt, hope mixed with despair. Kafka's correspondence with Dora Diamond, the woman who cared for him during the last year of his life, reveals a softer, more content side of the writer. Dora, unlike Felice and Milena, was someone with whom Kafka seemed to find a sense of peace even as his health declined. Their letters, though fewer in number, show a man who, in the face of illness and impending death, was able to find moments of joy and connection. Dora became Kafka's caretaker and companion, and their relationship, though brief, provided him with a kind of solace that he had rarely experienced in his life. Kafka's diaries and letters are not just personal confessions, they are essential keys to understanding his fiction. The themes that dominate his works, alienation, guilt, the struggle for identity, the fear of authority, are all present in his personal writings. His deep sense of inadequacy, his fear of being misunderstood, and his constant questioning of his place in the world are woven into the fabric of his stories. In many ways, Kafka's fiction is an extension of his diaries and letters, an attempt to make sense of a world that felt both terrifying and incomprehensible to him. Through these personal writings, we gain a deeper understanding of Kafka's creative process. His struggle with self-doubt, his fear of failure, and his obsessive need for control over his work are all laid bare in his diaries and letters. Kafka often described writing as a painful, almost torturous process, one that required complete isolation and intense concentration. In one diary entry, he wrote, "A non-writing writer is a monster courting insanity." For Kafka, writing was not just an artistic endeavor, it was a way of surviving in a world that felt overwhelmingly hostile and absurd. In the end, Kafka's letters and diaries reveal a man who was deeply human, vulnerable, introspective, and searching for meaning in a world that often seemed devoid of it. They allow us to see beyond the towering literary figure and glimpse the fragile, conflicted soul behind the words. Through these writings, we come to understand Kafka not just as a master of modernist fiction, but as a man who, like the rest of us, struggled with the complexities of life, love, and the search for self. Franz Kafka's impact on modern literature is nothing short of monumental. Though he lived a relatively short life, and much of his work was published posthumously, Kafka's influence continues to resonate deeply with readers, writers, and thinkers alike. His writing, often described as Kafkaesque, has become synonymous with the surreal, the absurd, and the nightmarish aspects of modern life. Kafka's exploration of alienation, existential dread, and the impenetrability of bureaucratic systems has had a profound effect on the course of literature, shaping not just the way stories are told, but how we understand the human condition. One of the most striking aspects of Kafka's legacy is his ability to tap into the anxieties of modern life, fears that were only beginning to emerge during his time but have since become central to the human experience. Kafka lived at the dawn of the 20th century, a period marked by rapid industrialization, political upheaval, and the growing complexity of bureaucratic systems. These forces, which Kafka himself experienced firsthand through his work in insurance, found their way into his fiction, creating a literary landscape where individuals were often powerless, trapped in absurd and incomprehensible systems beyond their control. In The Trial and the Castle, Kafka's protagonists are caught in labyrinthine legal and bureaucratic structures, helpless in the face of faceless authorities. These works reflect a deep distrust of power and institutions, themes that would become central to modernist literature and later movements. Kafka's portrayal of the individual lost in a world that is indifferent, or even hostile, to human needs speaks to the experience of modern life, where personal agency is often eroded by complex systems of control. But Kafka's influence extends far beyond his themes of bureaucracy and alienation. His unique narrative style, blending the mundane with the surreal, the banal with the nightmarish, has had a profound impact on how stories are told. Kafka's characters often find themselves in situations that seem both ordinary and utterly absurd, and this tension between the familiar and the strange has become a hallmark of modernist and postmodernist fiction. Writers such as Albert Camus, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Samuel Beckett drew on Kafka's existential concerns, exploring themes of absurdity, futility, and the search for meaning in a world that offers none. Camus, in particular, was deeply influenced by Kafka's work. In his essay The Myth of Sisyphus, Camus explores the idea of the absurd hero, a figure who, like Kafka's protagonists, struggles against a world that is incomprehensible and indifferent. For Camus, Kafka's characters, like Joseph K. in The Trial or K. in The Castle, represent the quintessential absurd hero, caught in a futile struggle to find meaning in a world that resists their efforts at every turn. Kafka's exploration of this theme laid the groundwork for existentialist literature, which would dominate much of the 20th century. In addition to Camus and Sartre, writers such as George Orwell and Philip K. Dick have acknowledged Kafka's influence in their work. Orwell's 1984 and Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Both explore Kafkaesque themes of surveillance, control, and the erosion of individuality. The sense of paranoia and existential dread that pervades these works can be traced back to Kafka's exploration of the same themes in his fiction. Kafka's ability to capture the fear of losing control over one's life and the sense of being watched and judged by unseen forces has become a defining feature of dystopian literature. Kafka's legacy also extends to the realm of language. The term Kafkaesque has entered the lexicon to describe situations that are absurd, surreal, or nightmarish, particularly those involving oppressive bureaucracy or senseless rules. This word has become a shorthand for describing the often incomprehensible systems of modern life, from legal battles to encounters with government institutions. The fact that Kafka's name has become synonymous with a particular type of experience speaks to the universality of his themes and the enduring relevance of his work. In addition to his influence on existentialism, modernism, and dystopian literature, Kafka has also inspired the development of magical realism, particularly in Latin American literature. Writers such as Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Jorge Luis Borges have cited Kafka as a key influence in their work. Kafka's blending of the fantastic with the everyday, his ability to make the bizarre seem plausible, has become a hallmark of magical realism. In works like The Metamorphosis, where a man wakes up to find he is turned into a giant insect, Kafka creates a world where the impossible becomes part of the fabric of reality, a technique that would be embraced by magical realists. Kafka's impact is not limited to literature alone. His themes of alienation, absurdity, and the struggle for meaning in an indifferent world have influenced filmmakers, visual artists, and playwrights. Filmmakers such as Orson Welles, who directed a film adaptation of The Trial, and David Lynch, whose surreal, often nightmarish narratives echo Kafka's tone, have drawn on Kafka's themes in their work. In the world of theater, playwrights like Harold Pinter and Tom Stoppard have incorporated Kafka's sense of absurdity and existential dread into their plays, exploring the tension between individual agency and systemic oppression. Moreover, Kafka's work has resonated in the world of philosophy. His stories, particularly The Trial and The Castle, have been interpreted through a variety of philosophical lenses, from existentialism to deconstruction. Philosophers such as Theodor Adorno and Walter Benjamin have explored the ways in which Kafka's work reflects the alienation and fragmentation of modern life, while others, such as Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari, have examined Kafka's work through the lens of psychoanalysis and the unconscious. Kafka's influence also extends to the digital age, where the complexities of modern life have only deepened. In an era of increasing surveillance, data collection, and opaque bureaucracies, Kafka's themes of powerlessness and alienation feel more relevant than ever. The sense of being trapped in a system that is beyond comprehension, where the rules are arbitrary and the consequences severe, is something that resonates deeply with contemporary readers. As we navigate a world that is increasingly governed by algorithms, Kafka's work continues to offer a chilling reflection of the dangers of dehumanization in a world driven by faceless systems of control. Kafka's legacy is profound not only because of his ability to capture the anxieties of his time, but because those anxieties have only intensified in the centuries since his death. His exploration of the absurdity of modern life, the fragility of identity, and the inescapable nature of bureaucratic power has only grown more relevant as the world has become more complex, more interconnected, and more overwhelming. In this way, Kafka's influence on modern literature is not just a matter of style or theme, it is a reflection of the enduring truths about the human experience that Kafka, in his quiet and introspective way, was able to articulate with such power. Kafka's impact on modern literature, philosophy, and culture continues to reverberate, shaping not only the stories we tell, but the way we understand the world around us. His ability to capture the existential anxieties of modern life has ensured that his work remains as vital today as it was when it was first published, speaking to the deepest fears and desires of the human soul. In this sense, Kafka's legacy is not just literary, it is universal. Franz Kafka's influence stretches far beyond the realm of literature, shaping not only the written word but also the broader world of art, culture, and thought. His works, steeped in existential dread, surrealism, and the absurdity of modern life, have transcended the boundaries of literature to become touchstones for filmmakers, visual artists, musicians, and philosophers. The term Kafkaesque has become part of the global lexicon, describing situations where individuals face senseless, nightmarish bureaucracy or absurdity, capturing the haunting and often incomprehensible nature of modern existence. Kafka's exploration of alienation, control, and the labyrinthine structures of power has been especially influential in the world of film. Directors such as Orson Welles, David Lynch, and the Coen brothers have drawn on Kafka's themes and narrative structures to create films that reflect the surreal and oppressive atmospheres found in The Trial, The Metamorphosis, and The Castle. Orson Welles' 1962 film adaptation of The Trial remains one of the most direct homages to Kafka in cinema. Welles captured the dark, oppressive atmosphere of the novel, using stark, disorienting cinematography to reflect the nightmare of Joseph K's trial. Welles said that Kafka captures the fear, the helplessness of the individual who is oppressed by the state and by society, and this oppressive mood is palpable throughout the film. Welles' depiction of bureaucratic absurdity and personal powerlessness brings Kafka's themes to life visually, emphasizing the feeling of being trapped in a system with no escape. David Lynch, known for his surreal and unsettling films, has also cited Kafka as a major influence. Lynch's films, particularly Eraserhead and Mulholland Drive, mirror the dreamlike, nightmarish logic of Kafka's works, where ordinary characters find themselves lost in bizarre, incomprehensible worlds. Lynch's use of surreal imagery, oppressive atmospheres, and an overarching sense of dread closely aligns with the Kafkaesque. Both creators explore the tension between the mundane and the extraordinary, placing characters in situations that are terrifying not because of overt horror, but because they challenge the very nature of reality. The Coen brothers' A Serious Man is another example of Kafka's influence on contemporary cinema. The film's protagonist, Larry Gopnik, experiences a series of increasingly surreal, inexplicable events, much like Kafka's characters, particularly Joseph K., in The Trial. The Coen brothers, like Kafka, explore the absurdity of fate and the helplessness of individuals who are caught in systems, whether familial, religious, or societal, that seem to defy all logic and reason. Kafka's imagery, with its stark contrasts between the mundane and the surreal, has also had a profound effect on visual artists. The oppressive, faceless bureaucracies Kafka describes in his works have been interpreted and reimagined in paintings, sculptures, and installations that explore themes of isolation, existential dread, and the loss of identity. One of the most prominent ways Kafka's influence has been felt in the visual arts is through depictions of alienation and fragmented identity. Artists such as Alberto Giacometti, a Swiss sculptor and painter, have drawn on Kafka's exploration of isolation. Giacometti's long, thin figures, standing alone in vast, empty spaces, evoke the same sense of loneliness and estrangement found in Kafka's works. These figures, like Kafka's protagonists, seem to exist in a world where they are disconnected from both others and themselves. Surrealist painters such as Salvador Dali and Max Ernst also found inspiration in Kafka's blending of the bizarre and the real. Dali, in particular, was fascinated by the psychological depth of Kafka's works, and his paintings often evoke the same unsettling combination of everyday settings disrupted by nightmarish elements. In this way, Kafka's work fits neatly within the surrealist movement's larger goal of revealing the irrational underpinnings of reality. More recently, visual artists working in installations and performance art have invoked Kafka to explore the oppressive nature of modern bureaucracies and the dehumanization of individuals in the digital age. Installations that mimic Kafka's maze-like, oppressive bureaucracies can be seen in exhibitions where audiences are forced to navigate confusing, nonsensical paperwork or deal with faceless authorities, all designed to evoke Kafkaesque feelings of futility and frustration. Kafka's themes of entrapment, isolation, and absurdity have naturally made their way into the theater. Playwrights such as Harold Pinter, Tom Stoppard, and Samuel Beckett have explored the Kafkaesque in their work, crafting plays that echo Kafka's exploration of existential dread and the absurdity of human existence. Pinter's The Birthday Party and Beckett's Waiting for Godot are both steeped in the Kafkaesque tradition, with characters trapped in situations they cannot control or understand. The sense of being at the mercy of unseen forces, whether they are bureaucratic, societal, or existential, is central to both writers' works, and it is a theme that echoes Kafka's own depiction of human helplessness. Kafka's works themselves have been adapted for the stage countless times, with directors and playwrights drawn to the theatricality of his situations. His novels and short stories lend themselves well to performance, with their tight focus on individual characters' psychological and emotional torment. Kafka's The Trial and The Metamorphosis have been staged in various interpretations, with some productions opting for minimalist, stark settings to heighten the sense of isolation, while others embrace the surreal, using abstract set designs to reflect the disorienting, dreamlike quality of Kafka's narratives. Kafka's influence has extended even into the world of music. Composers such as Georgy Kurtag and Philip Glass have used Kafka's works as inspiration for operas and compositions that explore the emotional and psychological depth of his stories. Kurtag's opera Kafka Fragments, composed in 1987, is a series of miniatures based on Kafka's letters and diary entries. The music mirrors the fragmented nature of Kafka's writing, with its abrupt shifts in tone and mood, capturing the sense of alienation and despair that runs through much of his work. Each fragment, like a snippet of Kafka's thoughts, offers a glimpse into the mind of a man who was both fascinated and terrified by the world around him. Philip Glass, known for his minimalist compositions, also adapted Kafka's In the Penal Colony into an opera in 2000. Glass's hypnotic, repetitive musical style echoes the nightmarish, bureaucratic absurdity of Kafka's story, creating an atmosphere of mounting dread and inevitability. Kafka's influence can even be found in popular music, with bands such as Radiohead and The National drawing on his themes of alienation, anxiety, and existential doubt in their lyrics and soundscapes. Radiohead's music, in particular, often invokes Kafkaesque imagery, reflecting a world where individuals are trapped by invisible forces, be they societal expectations, government control, or personal demons. The term Kafkaesque has become one of the most enduring aspects of Kafka's cultural legacy. It is used not only to describe literature and art, but also to capture real-world situations that seem absurd, nightmarish, or inexplicably complex. Whether it's dealing with government bureaucracy, navigating corporate hierarchies, or feeling powerless in the face of impenetrable systems, Kafka's vision of the modern world has become shorthand for the existential confusion and helplessness that defines so much of contemporary life. Kafka's works, though grounded in the specific anxieties of his time, have proven to be timeless. As modern life becomes increasingly complex, bureaucratic, and alienating, his explorations of powerlessness, absurdity, and the fragility of identity have only grown more relevant. Kafka's influence can be felt in everything from legal dramas to dystopian fiction, from political commentary to philosophical discourse. The universality of Kafka's themes ensures that his work continues to inspire and challenge artists, writers, filmmakers, and thinkers across the world. His ability to capture the existential dread of modern life and his understanding of the deep, irrational forces that shape our world make Kafka not just a literary figure, but a cultural one. His work has transcended the written word to become a lens through which we can view and make sense of the surreal, often baffling nature of human existence. Franz Kafka's life and works remain a profound testament to the complexities of the human condition. His writing reflects the struggle of individuals trapped in absurd and alienating situations, unable to fully comprehend the forces shaping their lives. But beyond his nightmarish visions of bureaucracy and powerlessness, Kafka's work offers a deep, existential reflection on the nature of reality, the search for meaning, and the fragility of human existence. As we reflect on Kafka's literary legacy, we are reminded of the quiet, introspective man who spent his life trying to make sense of a world that often seemed senseless. Kafka's genius lay in his ability to capture the subtleties of human experience, the deep-seated anxieties, the unspoken fears, the overwhelming sense of isolation that so often defines modern life. He wrote not only about external forces, such as oppressive systems and bureaucratic absurdities, but also about the internal struggles that each of us faces, the battle for self-acceptance, the fear of rejection, the longing for connection, and the desire to understand one's place in the world. His works, such as the Trial, the Metamorphosis, and the Castle, have left an indelible mark on modern literature, inspiring countless writers, philosophers, and artists to explore the darker, more complex aspects of existence. These stories remain relevant today, resonating with readers who recognize in Kafka's characters the same frustrations, confusions, and yearnings that exist in their own lives. Kafka's ability to express the inexpressible, those moments of profound isolation, of existential doubt, continues to speak to readers across generations and cultures. In The Metamorphosis, we see the tragic figure of Gregor Samsa transformed into a monstrous insect, struggling to understand his new reality while grappling with the emotional distance that grows between him and his family. Gregor's transformation is not just physical, it is symbolic of the alienation and dehumanization that so many people feel in their own lives. Kafka understood the fear of being misunderstood, of losing oneself in a world that values utility over individuality, and he expressed these fears with a raw, haunting clarity. The Trial, with its chilling depiction of a man caught in the merciless gears of a faceless legal system, remains a powerful critique of bureaucracy and power. Joseph K's struggle to navigate a system that offers no answers, no justice, and no escape mirrors the experience of many who find themselves at the mercy of institutions that seem indifferent to their humanity. In this novel, Kafka explores not only the terror of being falsely accused, but also the deeper existential fear of living in a world where meaning is elusive and control is impossible. Kafka's influence, however, extends beyond his specific themes of alienation and existential dread. His narrative style, marked by its blend of the surreal and the mundane, the strange and the familiar, has shaped the way stories are told in the modern era. Writers such as Albert Camus, Jorge Luis Borges, and Gabriel Garcia Marquez drew inspiration from Kafka's ability to blend reality and fantasy, creating worlds that defy logic yet feel intimately connected to the human experience. But perhaps the most enduring aspect of Kafka's legacy is his exploration of the fragile, elusive nature of identity. Kafka's characters are often searching for meaning, for answers, for a sense of self that remains just out of reach. This quest for identity is a theme that resonates deeply in the modern world, where individuals are increasingly defined by external forces, jobs, social expectations, societal pressures, and where the search for authentic selfhood can feel like an impossible task. In reflecting on Kafka's life, we also see a man who embodied the contradictions that filled his stories. He was deeply introspective, plagued by self-doubt, yet capable of profound insight. He longed for connection, yet feared intimacy. He wanted recognition as a writer, yet he asked that his works be destroyed upon his death. These contradictions, these inner tensions, are what make Kafka's writing so compelling. They speak to the universal human experience of being pulled in different directions, of navigating a world that is never quite what it seems. Kafka's works remind us that, despite the absurdity and chaos of life, there is beauty in the struggle. His stories are filled with moments of quiet reflection, of tenderness and vulnerability, even in the face of overwhelming odds. In The Castle, for example, the protagonist's endless quest to gain access to the mysterious castle becomes a metaphor for the search for meaning, a search that, though ultimately futile, is still worth pursuing. Kafka's characters, much like Kafka himself, continue to strive for understanding, even when the world offers no clear answers. As we conclude our journey through the life and works of Franz Kafka, we are left with the sense that Kafka's stories are, in many ways, our own. His exploration of human isolation, his critique of oppressive systems, and his deep understanding of the existential dilemmas we all face continue to resonate with readers today. Kafka's ability to articulate the unspoken fears and anxieties that define the modern world ensures that his work will remain relevant for generations to come. In a world that often feels overwhelming, Kafka offers us a mirror in which we can see ourselves reflected, our hopes, our fears, our struggles, and our search for meaning. His legacy is not just literary, it is profoundly human. And in that sense, Kafka's work will continue to whisper to us across time, reminding us that, even in the darkest moments, there is still the possibility of understanding, of connection, and of finding our place in the world. As we draw this journey through the enigmatic life and profound works of Franz Kafka to a close, it's important to pause and reflect on the timeless nature of his legacy. Kafka's writing, filled with haunting imagery and existential questions, resonates today as much as it did when it was first penned. His exploration of the absurdity of life, the isolation of the individual, and the silent, faceless forces that govern our world has left an indelible mark on literature, philosophy, art, and culture. Kafka didn't offer us easy answers. His stories rarely concluded with resolution or clarity. Instead, he opened doors to deeper questions about what it means to be human in a world that often feels incomprehensible. His characters, trapped in surreal and often nightmarish scenarios, reflect our own struggles as we navigate the complexities of modern life. Whether it's Gregor Samsa waking up to find himself transformed in the metamorphosis, or Joseph K. being caught in an endless, unjust trial in the trial, Kafka's protagonists offer us mirrors into our own lives, mirrors that reveal the tensions, the doubts, and the quiet battles that we all face. Kafka's work encourages us to embrace the unknown, to seek meaning even when it feels elusive, and to continue striving for understanding in a world that doesn't always make sense. This is perhaps Kafka's greatest gift to us, not just his stories, but the invitation to look more deeply into ourselves and the world around us. So as we bid farewell to this exploration of Kafka's life and works, we invite you to carry these reflections with you. His writing, rich with layers of meaning, has the power to speak to each of us in different ways, depending on where we find ourselves on our own journeys. Kafka's legacy endures because it taps into universal truths about isolation, about power, about the struggle to find meaning in a world that often feels absurd. We hope that this dive into Kafka's life has not only illuminated his genius, but also sparked your curiosity. If you haven't yet explored his works in depth, let this be an invitation. Each story, each sentence, carries with it a weight of significance that grows with every reading. Kafka's world is one that is worth revisiting time and time again. As you go, remember to follow our channel for more whispered tales and explorations of the lives of literary and historical giants. Kafka's is just one of many stories we will share, stories that invite us to think, reflect, and find new ways to see the world. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Let the whispers of Kafka's words linger with you as you settle into the quiet moments of your evening. And, as always, good night, dear listeners, and sweet dreams.